My name is Marilyn, and I'm 63. I live alone in a small rented apartment near the edge of town. It's nothing fancy, just a quiet place where I can still bake my pies and watch the birds from the window each morning. That Thanksgiving morning started like any other. I brewed my coffee around 8:15 a.m., heated up a leftover pot pie, and sat down in my fleece robe to watch the parade on TV. Then came the knock. I opened the door, and there he was. My son Kyle, dressed in a crisp coat, holding a bouquet of chrysanthemums, and wearing that warm grin I hadn't seen in months. He hugged me tight, stepped inside, and said something I'll never forget. "Did you enjoy the lake house I gave you?" I froze. My hands were still holding the pie plate. I thought maybe I misheard him. Lake house. I looked at him and asked, "What lake house?" His smile faltered just a little, like he thought I was joking. But I wasn't, and in that strange, suspended moment, with steam rising from my coffee and a breeze coming in through the cracked window, I realized something was terribly, terribly off. After my husband passed away 5 years ago, the house got too quiet. I tried to keep it going for a while, but between the bills and the memories, I knew I couldn't afford to stay. So I moved into this little place across town. It's modest, the kind of place where the hallway light flickers if you use the microwave too long. But it's mine, and I make it work. I bake pies and cookies in small batches and sell them at the weekend farmers market. It doesn't bring in much, but between that and the monthly Social Security check I manage. I cut coupons. I mend my own clothes. I even reuse tea bags sometimes. Some weeks I get creative with leftovers. But I never felt poor. I felt useful. Independent even. Kyle had moved out years ago, chasing a great job opportunity 2 states over. When he got married to Cassandra, I was thrilled. She had this calm, polished way about her. She always spoke to me with kindness, sent thoughtful birthday cards, and made sure I had everything I needed. When Kyle got too busy to call, Cassandra stepped in. She told me how hard he was working, how tired he'd been lately, and not to take the silence personally. I believed her. She helped me get set up with online grocery deliveries and even had a handyman come fix my leaky sink. She told me not to worry about the money. Kyle was sending funds every month, and she handled it all. I didn't ask questions. I trusted her. I felt lucky, honestly. Not every mother-in-law gets along with her son's wife, but Cassandra made it easy, and so I settled into this rhythm. Holidays came and went. Sometimes they visited, sometimes they didn't, but there were always cards and small gifts and updates through Cassandra. I missed my son, but I told myself this was just how life goes when kids grow up. You become background noise, and you learn to be content with that. Still, now and then, when the apartment got too quiet or the tea too thin, I wondered if maybe I'd handed over too much of my world to someone I barely knew. But those thoughts felt ungrateful, so I pushed them down. I didn't know yet just how wrong I was. A week after Thanksgiving, Kyle called me through video chat. I was in the middle of washing dishes, but I dried my hands and answered. He looked tired but cheerful, sitting in what looked like a hotel room. He asked how things were going, and then, just before hanging up, he said something that caught me off guard. "I'm really glad you're enjoying the lake house. That place has been your dream for years." I smiled, but my stomach tightened. I nodded like I understood, but inside I was confused. I didn't want to interrupt him. He hung up a minute later, saying he had another meeting coming up around 11:45 a.m. I sat there with my phone still in my hand. What lake house? I lived in the same apartment I'd been in for years. I hadn't even been to a lake in months. I asked Cassandra about it the next day when she called. Her tone was calm as always, but there was a slight pause when I mentioned what Kyle said. She laughed it off. "Oh, Marilyn, you probably misunderstood. You've been tired lately. You know how our minds wander." Then she changed the subject to holiday cookie recipes and the best way to ship pies out of state. I let it go, but something didn't sit right. The real punch came 2 days later. Kyle called again this time while he was driving home. He asked casually if I'd gotten the latest deposit. I asked what he meant. He said he'd been sending $1,500 a month to my account for nearly 2 years. That added up to over $36,000. My heart sank. I hadn't seen a dime. I told him that money never came to me. Not once. He got quiet. I could hear his breathing through the speaker. Then he said maybe the routing was wrong or maybe Cassandra mixed something up. But his voice wasn't steady anymore. I could feel the same seed of doubt sprouting in his mind, too. I didn't say anything else. I just told him I'd look into it. That night I sat alone at the kitchen table with my checkbook and a mug of weak tea. I wasn't sure what I was more afraid of. That something had gone horribly wrong. Or that someone I trusted had been quietly rewriting the story of my life behind my back. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. But something in my gut kept nudging me, pulling at loose threads that no longer fit. So I called my old friend Sandra. She used to work in a bank, and even though she was retired, she still had connections. I asked her quietly to help me check if there were any accounts under my name that I didn't know about. 2 days later, she called me around 9:15 a.m. Her voice was careful. She said there was an account opened in my name 18 months ago tied to a different email address and a P.O. box in another town. The account had regular deposits and transfers. She couldn't see where the money was going, but the deposits matched what Kyle had said. My name was there plain as day, but nothing else matched. I felt cold all over. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. Then I called a legal aid office. They set me up with a young attorney named Greg, who agreed to meet me the next morning at 10:30 a.m. I brought every piece of mail, every bank slip, every card Cassandra had sent. I also printed out the emails she'd forwarded from Kyle. I needed someone to help me make sense of this maze. Greg was patient and methodical. He asked questions, took notes, and flipped through my papers. Then he pulled up county property records. And there it was, a lake house. A 3-bedroom home listed under my name, purchased with a down payment made from the mysterious account. He showed me the closing documents. My signature was there, but I had never seen those papers in my life. He leaned back in his chair and gave me a look I'll never forget. He said it was forgery. Whoever did this had access to my personal details and had faked my identity. He suspected power of attorney fraud. He asked if I'd ever signed anything giving Cassandra access to my finances. I said no. He asked if she'd ever had my ID or social security number. I said maybe once to fill out a form for online grocery assistance. My hands were trembling by then. Greg told me this wasn't just financial misconduct. It could be criminal. He would draft a formal complaint and begin documenting everything. He said I'd need to file a report and possibly appear in court. I couldn't breathe. My world had narrowed to a tiny, sharp point. I had trusted someone to care for me, to act as a bridge between me and my son. And instead, she'd been quietly building an empire on my name. That night, I went through every drawer in my apartment. I found old letters from Cassandra, sticky notes with reminders, even a birthday card that had the return address of the P.O. box. It had been in front of me the whole time, hidden in plain sight. At midnight, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. I wasn't just betrayed. I was erased, replaced with a version of me that I had no control over. The woman who owned a lake house. The woman who received deposits. The woman who smiled on forged documents. But she wasn't me, and I wasn't going to stay quiet any longer. I invited them over on a Sunday evening. I said I missed seeing them both and wanted to make dinner just the three of us. Cassandra offered to bring wine, and Kyle said they'd arrive around 5:30 p.m. I spent the day baking chicken pot pie and setting the table with my old china. I even lit the candles Kyle gave me years ago, the ones that smelled faintly of cedar and vanilla. They came in smiling. Cassandra hugged me like nothing had changed, like she hadn't been living a second life behind my back. Kyle looked tired, but happy to be home. We ate and laughed, talked about old vacations and silly memories. It felt warm, almost real. But the warmth in my chest was quickly replaced by a low burn I could no longer ignore. When dessert came out, I set down my fork and looked right at her. I asked her how long she thought she could keep it up. She blinked, still holding her wine glass. "Keep what up, Marilyn?" Her voice was sweet, but her hands tightened. I turned to Kyle and said I found the house, the one by the lake, the one I apparently bought with money I never touched. The room went still. Cassandra put her glass down slowly. Kyle furrowed his brow. I told him I found the account, the emails, the false address, the fake signature. I said I'd spoken to a lawyer. Her face turned pale. Kyle looked from me to her and back again. Cassandra started to speak, but I cut her off. I told them I knew everything. The transfers, the forged paperwork, even the fact that she'd rerouted all my mail for months to keep me in the dark. Cassandra stood up, her voice shaking. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said she did it to protect Kyle, that I was struggling and too proud to ask for help, so she managed things for me. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so wildly off from reality it made my chest ache. I asked her how stealing my name and draining my son's support was protection. Kyle stood now too, his face red, his jaw tight. He asked her directly if it was true, if she'd lied to him, if she'd taken everything meant for his mother. She didn't answer at first, just stood there with her arms crossed. Then finally she said yes, quietly, barely a whisper. Yes. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Kyle turned away from her. I could see tears building in his eyes. He didn't yell. He just said he needed air and walked out the front door. Cassandra didn't chase him. She didn't look at me either. I sat down, my heart pounding in my ears. The candles flickered. The pie grew cold. And in that moment, everything I had feared was no longer just a suspicion. It was real. The mask had fallen, and what lay beneath was something I never wanted to see in my family, but I had, and there was no unseeing it. The weeks that followed moved slowly, like walking through thick fog. Cassandra was charged with multiple counts of identity fraud and financial theft. She accepted a plea deal that spared her jail time, but required full restitution and community service. The court also mandated that she stay away from me for a year. It wasn't about punishment for me. I just needed space to breathe again. Greg, my lawyer, helped recover part of the stolen funds. More importantly, the bank cleared my name. They confirmed I'd never signed those papers. They mailed me a formal letter of apology. It wasn't much, but holding that letter in my hands made me feel like I had some part of my life back. The lake house was sold, and the money was returned to Kyle. He offered to use it to buy me a new place, but I said no. What I needed couldn't be bought. Kyle took leave from work. He moved back into town temporarily. Every morning he made us eggs and toast around 7:45 a.m. Then he'd sit with me on the porch, sip his coffee, and just listen. We didn't talk much about what happened, but I saw it in his eyes. The guilt, the ache of missing time. I never blamed him. He trusted the person he loved. I did too. One afternoon, I wrote Cassandra a letter. I didn't send it through the lawyer. I left it in the mailbox of her sister's house where I heard she was staying. I told her I forgave her. Not because what she did was small, but because carrying hate would only tie me tighter to what she'd done. I didn't want that weight anymore. I wanted peace, and in letting go, I gave it to myself. It wasn't the end of the story. Not really. But it was a moment of stillness, a place to rest after the storm, a small, quiet choice to begin again. At the final court hearing, Cassandra chose to speak. She stood in front of the judge, her hands trembling slightly. Her voice was steady but not cold. She said she didn't do what she did out of greed. She said it came from fear. She talked about her childhood, about how her mother had taken care of her dying grandmother for nearly a decade, and how the care turned into bitterness, how her mother slowly crumbled under the weight, taking it out on her father. Cassandra said she grew up watching the man she loved become invisible in his own home, that every smile faded, that love turned into duty, and duty turned into silence. She said she didn't want Kyle to become that man, to give up his dreams, his career, his freedom for years of caretaking. She told herself she was protecting him, that if Marilyn stayed comfortable but distant, things would stay balanced. She didn't mean to hurt anyone, but she did. I sat there listening, and for the first time I saw more than what she took. I saw why she took it. I saw a woman still haunted by a house filled with tension and unsaid words. A girl who had learned that love was something that always came with loss. And in that moment, something in me softened. Not because I approved, but because I understood. Hurt people don't always look broken. Sometimes they build walls so high even they forget what they're trying to keep out. Forgiving her didn't erase what happened, but it gave me something back that I thought I'd lost. Peace. Some nights I still replay the lies, the silence, the look in her eyes. But I don't carry it like a burden anymore. I carry it like a lesson. Maybe you've been hurt by someone you trusted too. Maybe you're still holding on to that weight. So I want to ask you something. If you were me, would you have forgiven her? Would you have let go? Tell me in the comments. I'd really love to know what you would have done.